All right. Looks like we're up and running for today. I'm just doing some quick sound checks and tweaks on the audio, but we can go ahead and get everything loaded and get started with today's jam stream. Go ahead and turn on the desktop sounds alerts. Hopefully this time I'm able to avoid the mic feedback that we had last time. I will rely on the chat to let me know if there's any audible sound feedback. I think it's related to my EQ settings being a little too high. So for today, I'm gonna try and dial them back a little bit, and we'll see, especially when I'm making noises, if it reduces the amount of feedback that's coming in on the stream, because I don't want it to be distracting. So what are we doing today on this jam stream? Well, I thought I would test out a new concept for content here that's not going to be anything groundbreaking, but something I do want to revisit every once in a while. It's kind of a way to keep up on developing sounds and the sort of repertoire of things in beatboxing. We'll get to that in a little bit. Let me put a simple audio track down. Also today, and probably for the foreseeable future unless I see a reason not to, we also have Synthesizer Kun hooked up to the stream just like last time, and we will be using Synthesizer for BGM brainstorming like last time. I think it's an interesting tool that gives a lot more options for things that we can incorporate for music. And now that I have a somewhat reliable way to set this up that's going to be functional on stream, I think we'll go ahead and stick with that for now. But let me put a simple beat down for some background while I kind of talk through the plan and some stuff for today. So let's see, we can use this to test out audio as well. So here we go. And we can add a real simple piano line behind that. I'm going to leave the playback at about 50% on the audio readout here. And then once we actually get to BGM later, I'll adjust it if necessary. It just needs to be in the background, so it's not dead silence while I'm talking. So what we're going to do today as sort of developing ideas for the Beatbox jam streams, we'll do some warm-up, some basic drills for just getting everything primed and ready. And then from there, we're going to go into this concept that I've been working on and I want to test, called the sound inventory. And that'll probably take a little bit of time. Maybe we'll work in some freestyle practice in between. I don't think I'm going to do the speed run or freestyle challenge today. We'll do that maybe in a future stream because I want to test out this new concept. And then that'll probably occupy maybe the first third or first half of the stream, and then the rest will be devoted towards experimenting around with the loop and the synthesizer for brainstorming BGM ideas. And I'll talk a little bit more about the big project I'm working on for next year, the stuff that we're going to be experimenting around and trying to develop is going to be specifically for that project. And then that should occupy our time. We're looking at, unless we get really wrapped up in something, we've got about 2 hours for the stream time today. I've got a little bit of a schedule, but I think in that time we could cover a lot of material and get some ideas together. And maybe if we have some time, I can preview some stuff I'm working on. We'll see how much we get done on the BGM side. I'll think about that. That said, we can go ahead and turn this off. And we'll go ahead and start with some simple warm-ups, get the blood flowing, and get everything warmed up, specifically my face muscles and my voice. And from there, we will move on to exploring this idea of sound inventory. Hey, Iconic is swinging through. Iconic says, "Hi, Raku, can't stay at the moment, but dropping by to wish you a great stream. Much love, take care." All right, Iconic, thanks for popping in to say hi. Always appreciate you showing up and spreading the love. I hope you have a good rest of your day and weekend. Also, I don't know if, for the brief moment you're here, if you can give me any sort of feedback on the audio real quick before you pop out. I just want to make sure that we're not getting the feedback issues we had last time. But other than that, yeah, thanks for saying hi. Seems fine so far. Okay, no worries. I've been working on some setting things, so I just wanted to make sure. Appreciate it, dude. Okay, so let's see. We'll do some warm up, and then we will move on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is going to be interesting experiment. So let's do some warm up. Also be keeping an eye on the audio readout and seeing how everything is hitting and peaking. Should be about the same as normal. think that'll do for a warm-up start. We will kind of keep that going as we proceed to the next part, since it's going to sort of function kind of like a warm-up, and that should set us up fine for all the stuff we're looking at doing later. So the main thing I want to sort of test out and explore today on the jam stream is this whole concept of this thing I was developing called the sound inventory. And this isn't, again, it's not a groundbreaking concept. It's nothing intended to be revolutionary. But as a way for me as a beatboxer to keep track of the stuff that I know and learn and I'm working on, I was thinking throughout the week before the stream, trying to plan how I wanted to structure this. I wanted to think of an organized way to sort of catalog and be able to show to the stream and to potentially anybody that I encounter, even outside of content creation, when it comes to explaining how beatboxing works and treating it kind of like an instrument as opposed to just a skill. It is definitely both, but trying to create kind of an organized format for how to explain why beatboxing should be treated like an instrument is kind of the end goal of doing this. And so this is a concept I want to revisit maybe every few months, maybe every 6 months, we'll see, as a way to get kind of more of a concrete check on things that are being developed and things that I know, one, so I don't forget, and two, so that I get used to sort of on demand being able to explain different sounds, sound techniques, and sound theory. So let's just say I encounter someone at a party and they say, "Oh, I heard you know about beatboxing. Can you tell me about beatboxing?" Rather than just say, "Oh yeah, let me throw a sick beat out there," and whatever. If they are legitimately interested in learning about things from a musical or mechanical standpoint, then in my brain I've already got sort of this inventory ready to be able to say, okay, here's what it means for snares, or here's what it means for basses. And again, it's more of a practice method for me, but also a way to sort of reinforce all the stuff we talk about on these jam streams when it comes to sound theory and that discussion. So the best way I could think to approach the idea of sound inventory is to start with the basic sounds in beatboxing and treat it like you were doing a music lesson, or maybe more of like a lecture on the basics, the building blocks. And we've talked about that several times, many times in fact, throughout these jam streams. And rather than have a structured lesson plan or reading from a script, which I don't really like to do, this is going to be a bit more off the cuff, but meant to be kind of an organized progression of going through each of the basic building blocks. So the way I sort of developed this idea, and we'll test it on today's stream and see what people's reactions to it are and how it sounds like when I check out the archives. Basically, it's going to be kind of like a lesson of repetition, but showing off the sounds. And that probably doesn't really mean much without demonstrating it. But basically, I want to say, here's a basic sound that's part of the overall kit of beatboxing, and here are all the variations that I know off the top of my head, and force myself to really dig into the vault and make sure I'm not missing any, and demonstrate all of the differences in these sounds and break down the differences in technique if it's significant, but do that in a controlled demonstration and then move on to the next set. So a good way to illustrate that would probably be one of the most wide categories of variation in sounds in beatboxing, and that's snares. And so I was thinking about this, I said, it's pretty easy just to, in conversation with someone, say, oh yeah, there's 10 snares I know in beatboxing, and here's one, here's a PF snare, here's a outwards K, here's an inwards K, here's yada yada yada, and just rattle them off. But if you're trying to actively teach someone about how the sound changes and how it slots into the overall toolkit, it's a little bit more practical to show them in real time by demonstrating it with a beat. And so the format that I've experimented with is using a simple beat, nothing really complex as far as the other components of the sound, but each time you sort of restart the beat after a couple bars, or even with a break in between, you are slotting in just the one sound that you're trying to inventory and leaving everything else the same. So rather than saying, okay, I'm going to show you a PF snare, here's a drum and bass beat, or here's a K snare, here's a hip hop beat. It's the same beat every time, and the only thing changing, to the best of my ability, I'm not a machine, but to the best of my ability, the only thing we're focusing on is the sound that we're inventorying, in this case, snares. So to demonstrate what I mean by that, if I was talking to someone who knew nothing about beatboxing other than maybe something they saw on a video or maybe saw someone on the street performing, I would say, well, one of the first building blocks of the Beatbox sound kit is the snare, the hard hit that is in the middle of a beat, and sort of becomes the focus of the rhythm, depending on the rhythm itself. But there's a multitude of different ways to do snares. So, for example, if we take our practice beat, which is going to the best of my ability, sound like that's going to be the beat. I did it with a PF snare just for an example, but I'm going to do my best to recreate that same beat each time using different snares to showcase how it slots in, and again, to the best of my ability, because I'm not just automating this, show how the sound changes and how to do the sound differently as applicable. So for the first one, a PF snare, again, a P and an F sound sort of truncated and set at the same time with a quick burst, either with lung power or without lung power, gets you the so in the beat you get and that's one of the basic snare sounds that a lot of people learn because it's one of the more mechanically easy to pick up, and you just have to practice getting it clean and then getting that sharpness, and from there it's just kind of refining the sound. If we were to look at a variation of the PF snare, which is what I'm calling a dull or a low PF, in the beat it would sound like and the main difference is it's dropped in pitch a little bit. It sounds a little bit more loose, almost like you're slackening the head on a snare drum. And it doesn't quite hit as sharply. If you compare the regular PF, which is a to the lower PF, which is it's subtle, but if you're doing them side by side, you could tell that there's a difference in the way the sound comes out. And the way you do a lower PF, at least the way I'm doing it here, is just by using air pressure in your mouth and no lungs, and dropping the tension on your mouth and jaw a little bit so that it's getting a bit more of a resonance, kind of similar to how you would hollow for a hollow sound. So if you tighten your lips when doing the P and the F sound and using your lungs to really push the air out in a sharp burst, you get the regular PF, the much more forceful, kind of a sharp hit on the head of the drum. If you just use the pressure in your mouth and you drop a little bit and loosen, instead of the you're getting it's more muted and lower. So right there we've looked at two versions of the PF snare, and as part of the inventory, before we move on, we have version A, we have version B, the technique for doing version A, version B, and in the sample beat we've broken down how they sound differently. And as we go, it's probably going to be subtle depending on the sound, but for the sake of demonstration, someone listening can say, oh yeah, it's very obvious you have two instrument sounds and they're slightly different. And so I want to do that for all of the snares that I know as part of the inventory, and then we'll move on from there. Depending on how long it takes to get through that discussion, maybe we'll just focus on snares for today, and maybe next time we do a sound inventory for basses. But we'll see. Again, this is kind of an experiment just to see how I like the format and if it's clear with the information that I'm talking through. But let's move on. So let's move on to inward sounds. Maybe we can alternate the best of our ability. Inward sounds for snares. So we talked about one of the first beginner hurdles for beatboxing, the inward case snare. That compared to the PF snare, this one is definitely a lot more sharp. It can be breathy, but if you are doing it cleanly, it is a sharp hit and doesn't have much of like a dull resonance like a PF snare. It's meant to be a lot more of a shortened sound, and as a result, it works well for quick patterns and quick rhythms. But if we put it into the sample beat, we would have and again, comparing it to the PF snare, it's just a different type of sound and a different type of hit for the rhythm. And it gives a good alternative to an outward sound because unlike the PF snare, and to some extent the muted one, but the regular lung power PF snare, inwards K gives you a really short burst of air inwards, so you're actually being able to take back some oxygen while you're breathing out the sounds. And it's not really enough to sustain unless you're doing a bunch of them back to back. But if you're doing a really fast rhythm and chaining a lot of sounds together, being able to get a real quick burst of air gives you a little bit more sustaining power before you have to stop and breathe. And so I think the inward K is very versatile. It's one of my favorites. And thankfully, it didn't take me a long time to learn it in the beginning. It's a sound people struggle with because it's a very unusual and irregular rhythm, the way you're breathing. And as we go through the inventory of sounds, if people want me to explain technique, then I'm fine taking a pause and explaining how to do a sound, just so people know. That's fine. We always do that on these jam streams. But thinking about the K snare, there aren't a lot of, for the inward one at least, there aren't really a ton of variations that I really use. I tend to default to the regular sort of crisp one because to me, if I'm looking for a real clean snare hit, that's the one I default to for an inward sound. But one thing that is kind of interesting is by adjusting how much breath you're taking before you actually cut the airway off to do the snare does change the sound a little bit. And so a small variation that I do every once in a while might sound something like this with the inward K. You might get something that sounds like and probably in the beat it's a little bit hard to tell the difference in technique, but what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of a prolonged breath in between the snare hits so that it's getting a little bit of an airiness to it. So instead of just I'm getting so it's like just an intake of air before the snare, and it sounds kind of like a scratched snare or something that's being brushed in a way. So again, the short hit and then a breathing hit. I don't know what it's called. This is not different enough that I think it's got its own classification. It's just a variation. But the quick hit again, and the breathing version. So you're taking an extra half or quarter beat before the. So it's a 2-part snare instead of a 1. So again, and then that's just changing how the sound sort of flows. And in a pinch, it is getting you more air too, which is the main reason why I work that into rhythms. If I'm doing something really fast, or I'm coming off of something that's really fast.
Money on my mother, mine. Cop 5 haircuts at the same time. White gold pants, jet ski made of wine. Foie gras bust of Albert Einstein, get money.
Hey, Walsey's here, and Walsey has resubbed for 8 months. Thank you, Wazzy. I appreciate it. And that was very loud in my ears. Wazzy says, fart noises. That's right, we do very specifically organized and overly explained fart noises here on these jam streams. Just to give you some background on what we're doing, Wazzy, since you jumped on, we are experimenting with a new format that I'm developing called the sound inventory, where I go through a real simple demonstration of all the variations and techniques of a specific sound type in a set demo beat to explain the differences in technique and to show to someone who's interested in learning how the variation in sounds changes for beatboxing. So this is kind of a way to make it a bit more organized when it comes to explaining beatboxing, because to give you folks some background into why I even thought about doing this on stream, when I was out of town in another state, I met some people that were friends of the people we were hanging out with, and of course it got around that I make funny beatbox noises, and so they put me on the spot and said, hey, show us beatboxing, which I can do. But then after that, the person I was talking to said, hey, can you tell me more about it? And we're out for the evening, just kind of going around, and this person was talking to me, and I wanted to be able to explain things a little bit better rather than just off the cuff. And so this is a way to sort of organize everything from beatbox technique and sound theory in my brain and get in the habit of doing that, so that if someone asks me a lot of detailed questions, rather than kind of go in all directions, I can kind of break it down in a bit more of a clear and concise manner, so it makes sense, especially if they have a music background, which wasn't really relevant in the situation I was in. But if I do talk to someone who's a musician, then I can kind of present the information like a musician. That's kind of the point, to help me get better at explaining stuff, especially to you folks, and also to just have the information out there if anyone wants to learn about beatboxing. So going back to the inventory for the inward K snares, and I'm going to call this K snare adjacent sounds that are done with more or less the same technique. We talked about inward K and a variation on the inward K with like a breath inward K, we'll call it. There's a breathless version that is part of our technicality drills and practice, which is the rim shot, which is basically done with the same motion as an inward K, but you're not breathing in with your lungs. It's all using muscle and mouth pressure with your tongue. And the rim shot sounds like, it is a very short and kind of truncated sound. It doesn't have any sort of airiness to it. It's short and sharp, and it's meant to be that way because it can be slotted in for things like technicality, like we've talked about before. So before we get to that, in the practice beat, using the rim shot, it would sound like, you can tell, unlike the, which is a bit longer and has a bit of air sort of in the sound itself, the rim shot is very short and sharp. Just almost sounds kind of like not really like a click, but sound-wise, it's probably closer than a click due to its duration. But because it doesn't use lung power, you can do the rim shot more rapidly, hence its use in things like technicality drills, things like the TKK, and the rim shot functions very well as a quote-unquote speed type sound for really rapid patterns. That's how you get the rapid. And as you practice with speed, like we've talked about on the technicality drills, again, something I've been working on a lot lately is working on doing those chains really fast while adding slight variations to get a speed quote-unquote combo of noises using those fast rapid sounds. So instead of just a, you might get something like, And that becomes like a real quick combo you slot in between beats is kind of like a drum fill. That's how I've likened technicality. And rim shot works super well for that. I'm still trying to get better at it, but having the ability to do those quick improvised patterns is really fun. And one of the more interesting creative parts of beatboxing. So if we talk about variations for the rim shot, I'm working on one now I just sort of came up with yesterday, and it's not refined enough that I feel like I can really demonstrate it well. But if you move the position of your mouth a bit more towards the side of your inside of your cheek, and you kind of compress where the rim shot is hitting, it's tough to explain, and for the sake of today, we won't need to worry about it. But you can sort of change the way the rim shot hits. So instead of it just sounding really short and sharp, like if you move it slightly, it kind of gets a little bit more of an impact sound. And when I get better at it, I'll do a full demo later. I'm still kind of exploring the sound and figuring out how to do it. But if you move the sound position, it goes from to. Try not to make it sound wet because it sounds gross. But I'm trying to make it sound a bit more like a snap, but it's still short and sharp. So we'll put a pin in that one, but there is a variation in the rim shot that I don't know if I've really seen people use. I'm sure I'm not the first one to try it, but as soon as I figure out the muscle memory and position for it, I'll give it a proper demo on one of these streams in the future. Okay, so moving on in snares. We had the outwards PF snares and variations. We had inwards K snare, a slight variation. We had the rim shot. Now let's go back to outward and do the outward K. Since we're coming off the inward K, we can contrast the difference in the sound snare types and talk about the difference in technique. So inward snare is the one that sounds like and short, sharp hit, a little bit of a breathiness to it, really clean and good for a clean sounding hit. Outwards K, which is one of the first snares I ever learned, uses mouth pressure and a pronounced like the letter K. That's where the name of the technique comes from. The letter K with tongue pressure to take the k, the cats and boots and cats, and instead of it being kind of a subtle sharpness, if you develop the pressure and focus it, it goes from a k, no just a k, to a, and it becomes a very sharp sound in a burst. And if we compare it side by side, inwards, outwards, different sound. I think the outwards K has a sharper hit. It sounds a lot more like a real smack on the drum, as opposed to the inwards one, which is a bit more of a lighter part due to the airiness. But as a result, you can create some really impactful sounds with an outwards K, and it's one of my favorites as well. So we put it into the demo beat, we would get and it's kind of closer to a clap slightly. We'll get to that with another snare in a bit. But if you're looking for a bit more of a sharper, impactful hit, you get the outwards K. And it's also not a breathing sound per se, it's mouth pressure. So you don't use your lungs when doing the outwards K, at least not the way I do it. It's just mouth, tongue pressure and forcing that K sound really sharply kind of around the tongue, and that's how you're getting it. And doing things like layering with a melody or a bass is really easy with an outwards K, if you can get the hang of humming, because you're essentially separating the sound with the melody coming from your nose and the snare itself coming from your mouth. That's a bit more of an advanced topic we can talk about at a later date. So, variations on the outwards K. There's a couple that I could think of that I've sort of worked into beats as I've been kind of playing around with options. One would be a a breathing lead into the outwards K, kind of like we saw on the inward K with the same principle of putting air in front of the snare. It's just outwards. So instead of breathing in, it's outwards, and that would sound like it's just a S sound and then the snare, and it sounds kind of like a distortion on the front. And so if we put that into the practice beat, we might get something like and again, it's very subtle, and I don't really think it's a true variation because it doesn't mess with the sound too much, but you're going from just a sharp solo snare on its own with the to a so it's a longer sound, but combining those two gives you, again, a variation in the overall sound of the rhythm and the beat. Another variation, which is a lot more pronounced in its difference, would be a closed mouth or muted outward K. And that's just what I call it because it's literally what it is. To me, this is more of a true variation on the sound because it comes out very different. And so that sounds like all you're doing is creating that K sound, expelling the air out, but you keep your mouth closed. And so the sound is muffled and very muted. It sounds like something that's been filtered. So if we put that into the practice beat, it would sound like and again, if you really want to mess around with the sound types and how it's hitting the ear, the muted outwards K is really good for that. And one thing I've done in some of the real quick patterns and routines that I've created is you mess with the mouth position a little bit and open your mouth slightly to sort of tone down the quote-unquote filter and cause the sound to change over the course of the beat. So if you were going fully closed with like a, and let's say you're doing the same practice beat, but opening your mouth slightly as the beat progresses, then that filter is going to kind of go away. It's the equivalent of turning the dial down on a filter setting. So it sound like in the demo, and it's subtle, but basically that filter is going away and you're getting more of the sound that's coming out, and you can use that to kind of create a transition when it comes to a rhythm or a routine. I think, well, I don't remember what I called it at this point, but there was a drum and bass routine that I used this technique on. That's a bit maybe a better demonstration, but because it's faster, you're getting that progression a lot quicker. So real quick, it would sound like, and so it's going from the muffled to the unmuffled as a progression. And so that's a real easy variation to mess around with, but it does change the sound, so therefore it's part of the sound inventory. Now, I think that's it for outward K variations. There's not a ton that I readily use, but still worth mentioning just because, again, changes the sound, and as part of the inventory, we want to be able to speak to all the different slight variations in sound. So next up, let's talk about the last, what I consider the last major cornerstone snare, at least the one of the ones I use, and that's the BGM or spit snare. This one might be my favorite. Kind of depends on my mood, but the most pronounced and sharpest sounding snare in my arsenal, at least, the BGM. And it sounds like, this is the one that sounds like a clap. It's very sharp, and I need to be careful where I point on the mic with this. But if we slot that into the demo beat, it would sound like, And compared to the other ones, which have varying degrees of intensity, breathiness, or sharpness, the BGM is just pure sharpness. And once you kind of perfect it and get good at it, its ability to be really short and sharp is what improves over time. We've talked about technique for the BGM, where because it's such an unnatural motion, kind of like the inward K, when you first learn it, it's very kind of loose and wet. But as you practice it and you get lip strength, kind of like you're learning a wind instrument, you get the control to be able to create the short, sharp bursts, and that's how you're getting the... And so for this one, there isn't really a variation for the BGM that I use. All of the sort of tweaks to the formula and how I use the snare come down to speed and how I use it in a beat and kind of speed combos rather than a change to the sound itself. So we talked about doing a rapid breath and using the tongue like a staccato rhythm to break up the BGM snare as it's coming out. So instead of doing just one, you're doing a prolonged one and using your tongue to break up the hits, which is how you're going from like just doing it rapidly, like in eighth notes. If you wanted to double time it, you just do one breath with your tongue breaking up the notes, and that's how you're getting a... That's not really a variation, it's just a different way to do the technique in a different sort of scenario. And then the other one would be doing a triplet combo with like a snare, B snare, like a triplet, to get a more rapid rhythm. So instead of doing, you're doing... So it's two snares, but it's got a B in the middle, but you're doing it so fast, it's almost like a double snare. It's kind of the way people use it, I think. But I don't do that one quite as much. It depends on the rhythm. If I'm going for something that's not super fast, something like that, I might do that. But if I want really rapid notes, I'll do the interrupted one with the single breath and the tongue hits. Other than that, there's not really a whole lot as far as variation on BGM. I may have to think about ways to approach the technique or maybe do some research, but that one is incredibly useful and versatile. It's just pretty much done one way, which is why I can't think of any true variations on it. But I will think about that, and if I come up with any or discover any from the scene, we'll work that into the inventory. All right, so we talked about PF snares, inwards Ks, outwards Ks, BGMs. The last sort of catch-all column that I'm going to lump in for the inventory, because to me it's a bit more miscellaneous and these are not sounds I use a whole lot, I'm just going to call the miscellaneous category for snares, and as it builds out, maybe I'll separate it into its own category for the inventory here. But the first one is a PSH snare, a psh snare. And just like the name would suggest, it sounds like psh, 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 psh. This is kind of a more old school sound, probably part of the original lineup of sounds in early beatboxing from the 80s. But it's done the way it sounds. You're doing a P sound, a P, and the sh sound. Instead of a P and an F like a PF snare, it's a PSH in one burst, shortened up, and that's how you're getting a psh, psh, psh. And slotting that one into the practice beat, we would get... And so this one is just kind of different in sound, the way it hits compared to the others. It's done in the same way as a PF snare, and I haven't really thought about how you would do that one without using lung power. I guess you could. It's just a little bit more subdued if you're doing it using just mouth pressure on its own. But what's kind of interesting about the PSH that I was noticing as I was putting this together yesterday is, depending on your lip strength, you can really change how much the hit on the PSH snare really works into the sound. If you don't have really impactful lip pressure, it just sounds like psh, 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 which you can do the sound snare that way too. You could do like a, and it's a lot more soft. It almost sounds kind of like a brush hit on a snare drum head. Just a but if you have a lot more of a lip pressure as you're pushing the air out for the P in the PSH, it goes from to so you can make it very impactful, and that's the variation. So the regular one and the kind of more forceful, harder hit one, you're getting that really noticeable, punchy part of the sound, and depending on how you want that worked into the beat that you're doing, that becomes an option for how to vary the sound. And so that's interesting. I never really thought about that with the PSH, since it's not a snare I use a whole lot, but maybe I will start trying to work that into more beats, just because it has a lot of potential. So the next miscellaneous sound that I'm putting into this category, because again, this is meant to be a catch-all for things that are not part of the core set of sounds I use, is what I believe is called a punch snare. And I forget the notation for this one because I don't see it used very often. And this one is kind of a cousin to the PSH, but I don't consider it a variation because ultimately the sound comes out differently, but it's done in a similar way. So if you think of the real stereotypical like fighting game punching sound when, you know, characters are hitting each other, I'm pretty sure that's where this comes from in some capacity. Or like the punching sound effect in movies or cartoons where people are like hitting each other and the fists are flying and it's just like that sound is also a legit snare in beatboxing, and I'm pretty sure it's called a punch snare. That's what I call it, but this is, again, not one I use too often. And it's done similar to the PSH, but your mouth is a bit more open when you do it instead of having your teeth a little bit closer together. So instead of a pss, 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 this one is a pss, pss, pss. Your tongue is sort of in the middle of your airway and shaping the sound to be a bit more almost hollow-ish in sound. And so the regular punch snare would sound like you can change your mouth position to change kind of the pitch of it, but more or less it sounds like a stereotypical punch sound. But the version I've always used that I actually knew how to do before I started beatboxing, just because I heard it on a keyboard, and by just messing around in sheer random chance, I figured out how to duplicate it. And it's like what I'm calling a rolling punch sound, or rolling punch snare. And so you're combining a technique that we'll talk about in a different inventory, which is lip or tongue bass, rolling your tongue to get the. You're combining that with the punch snare or the. So you're putting those two together, and so it ends up sounding like. And I need to practice one a little bit more. I haven't used it a lot, so it's not quite as clean as it could be. But you're getting that sort of wet reverberation, or that rumbling, rolling reverberation with the hit. And so if we slot that into the demo beat, it would sound like. And it's just a much different, more unusual version of the punch snare that I think stands out a little bit more. And so I think I need to push to develop this one a bit more. And we'll see. I kind of want to talk to, next time I talk to an actual pro beatboxer, which is not often, I might see if that's something that people have used in the past, because again, it's an unusual variation on the punch snare, and I don't even see the punch snare used a whole lot. So the rolling punch snare, that's another one that I'm going to kind of put a pin in for now. I'll make it a point when doing freestyles and coming up with patterns to try and work that one in more, and then just work on refining it and getting better with it. because it's interesting. It's a little bit different in sound from some of the other ones that are commonly used in beatboxing. Let me see. Looking at the... Oh, I forgot to change my caption. That's okay. We're going to switch to BGM shortly anyway for the remainder of the stream. I need to remember to do that next time. I think I will do another inventory on basses next time. Thinking about the core mechanics of the beatbox sound set, I could do sort of an inventory on the other parts of a basic drum kit rhythm, but really kicks and hats are not really wide in variation. Like, I don't use a whole lot of different type of drum kicks in my beats. I have a regular one, and sometimes I'll drop it a little bit and make it lower, kind of more like a from to, or mute it a bit. It's not dramatic. You can't really tell unless you're listening really closely. And for hats are really open-ended. It's just different T sounds, you know, closed, short hats, open hats, like a ride cymbal, something like that. There's not a whole lot to really explain in the technique. So I'm not really going to include those as part of future inventories just because, again, there's not a lot to say. But for snares, for basses is going to be a big one because there's a lot of different bass techniques in beatboxing. More than snares, I think, depending on how you look at it. But that's going to be an interesting discussion. I might actually have to write some notes before I do a sound inventory on basses. But that'll be interesting. For the next jam stream, I'll see if I can prepare something a little bit more organized so I don't miss anything. For snares, I can kind of just go off the top of my head. But for basses, that's going to need to be a bit more of a organized discussion. I think that'll do it for this sort of prototype run on sound inventory. I will check out the archives and see if the information sounds like it flows or if it sounds like I'm rambling a bit too much. But I do like the idea of doing this every once in a while to sort of reorganize, especially if I've learned new sounds and we can add them to the inventory and just use it to create kind of like a living record of all the beatboxing stuff. Let me update my caption. We will move on to BGM for the remainder of the stream. Let's see. Where is my caption? There it is. BGM brainstorming. All right. Let me clear off everything. Save a blank loop here. Like I talked about, I think it was the last jam stream we did, which would have been a few weeks ago now because I was out of town. The next major project I'm working on, next major project, the next BGM release is going to most likely be before the end of the calendar year. I'm shooting for maybe around Thanksgiving time or early December. But the next release is going to be the second BGM compilation. So it's going to be a collection of the BGM tracks that we've done over the last probably about 6 or 8 months. It's been a while since I released the first one. And there's been a lot of tracks that I've recorded that we made with chat. And so it's going to be a release of all that stuff. And so unlike the Halloween pack, which was primarily featuring use of the synthesizer, the second BGM pack is going to be more straight up beatboxing sounds with the loop. And that will be put out on all platforms, again, for the end of the calendar year. And that will be the next immediate release. But the next big project I'm working on that, again, I briefly talked through on the last stream. I don't think we had time to demo anything, but I talked about it a little bit. It's going to be another themed pack, kind of like the Halloween ones, but even more specific in theme, and it's going to be fantasy tracks. And all of the BGM tracks that are going to go into that pack are primarily using the synthesizer. Haven't quite decided if I'm going to keep some of the ones that use a mix of beatboxing and synthesizer. That will be a final decision once I have all of the tracks that I'm going to make recorded, and then I'm going to have to eliminate some out. But the style is very closely modeled after old school RPG themes. So you think of things like from the SNES era of JRPGs, where you have, town themes, battle themes, dungeon themes. The whole release is going to be structured like that. And it's been a real interesting project to work on, and I'm sure it's going to continue to yield some interesting results. But that one I'm going to be collabing on, and I will talk probably a little bit more about that later, since the details are still very preliminary. But the release for that pack is going to be probably January-ish. It's going to be in the next year, but I don't know when exactly, because it's going to depend on how long it takes us to get everything finished. But it'll be sometime in the early part of 2023. And it's going to be a bit more of a project release instead of just a simple YouTube compilation video. When I released the Halloween pack, one of the things I did differently this year was I did icons for all the tracks. And so for the fantasy theme pack release, it's going to be something like that, where I do something different for the actual YouTube compilation video. And I'm pretty excited about that one, but I won't speak on it for now, since again it's very preliminary. But there'll be more to come on that. And so I want to spend the remainder of our time here thinking about ideas for that future release. And for that, we're going to be using the synthesizer and coming up with ideas for tracks to do. And to kind of give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, I've spent a lot of time working on battle themes. That's one of my favorite parts of old school RPGs, is the battle themes, and you get into fights. The regular random encounters, you have boss battles, you have decisive boss battles, you've got like rival party or plot critical character themes. And so the release is probably going to have like half a dozen battle themes. I will be working to make sure they're not just really rote carbon copies of each other and they're all kind of different in feel, but you can definitely plan on hearing a lot of things related to like a fight. And I'm going to basically create as many as I can with the different ideas, and then narrow it down to a select group that's going to be part of the pack. And I think we did this last time too. So rather than jump right into battle themes, let's take a step back and come up with some other ideas for other settings, and then maybe if we have time, we'll work on another battle theme. So I'm thinking of all of the major tropes in RPGs, all the different environments that your protagonist and main characters explore, which ones I've done already. We've gotten sort of... Actually, have we done an overworld theme? I don't think I've really done a true overworld theme. That's interesting. That's usually one of the first ones I think about when I think of old RPG themes. Huh. Okay. Well, that's going to be our first goal here, is to come up with something that's going to sound like walking around on an overworld map. So let's see. Let me give myself a drum kit here. I need to be a little bit careful because I have to look down into the side to where my synth is. My loop is directly in front of me, so if you see me looking down like that, it's me looking at the loop. But if you see me looking over the side, it's me looking at the synthesizer. So when we think overworld themes, we think of some of the greats like Final Fantasy VI, Terra's theme. We think of things like 600 AD in Chrono Trigger. And there's a whole mix of styles, something that's a bit more of a moving beat like Lufia 2's Overworld map, or something like a march like Breath of Fire 2, Breath of Fire and Breath of Fire 2, the main theme. And so I think of a good rhythm that's gonna be like kind of a driving forward type of rhythm, but not like aggressive. It doesn't need to sound like a battle theme, but it needs to sound kind of upbeat unless we were going for kind of light and whimsical. So looking at the keyboard here, we can check the audio too, and okay, I'm gonna drop that down. That is peaking on the mic. I wonder why the kicks are so much higher. That's interesting. I just need to not hit the key at full force, otherwise it's gonna redline. Because the snares are okay. It's just maybe it's the low end on the kicks is peaking out on the mic. Let me test that. Let me record just a real quick series on the loop to see how it's picking up the synthesizer, because I have this all piped into the loop, so everything I do on the synthesizer is being recorded by the loop, and that's why we're being able to incorporate that into the tracks. So let me see what the playback sounds like on that. Okay. That'll work. I think the other part of the problem is all of the sound coming in through the synthesizer is being run through the dynamic and EQ boost on the loop itself. It's treating it like an additional mic input. So the volume on the synth really does need to be a little bit lower than usual because it's being amplified by the settings on the loop. So I think this kick sounds good. Maybe we'll do these two. This kick and this snare. Now, if we're thinking about doing an overworld theme, this is actually not something I thought about, but it's pretty key to the overall vibe of the pack of songs. Maybe we start with a simple quarter note beat, and we'll build it instrument by instrument. We're getting kind of into Terra's theme territory with this tempo. Maybe we do something like that and add a double kick at the end. This is a drum roll, and this is just tied to one key on the synth itself, which is interesting. I've done this on a couple tracks. They weren't designed for this particular style. I don't know. It's going to sound a bit too March-like to me. Now, let's think about where we would slot in a snare, and I'm going to come back to the idea of a roll. I don't think I want to do that on this one. All right. I think of where the rhythm starts, and I'm going to kind of noodle around and see where it kind of fits to put a snare, and then I'll actually record it. I need to be careful I don't do this out of sync, or it's going to be hard to overdub. that could work. Have it sort of staggered on the offbeats for the snare. Well, let's do it like this. I don't like the way that sounds. I think it's the double kick that's screwing it up, so I'm going to redo that. It's going to be a little more basic, but it'll be easier to map out a rhythm. We can always add in some double bass kicks somewhere if we really need it. But I'm going to do 2 bars of quarter note, and that'll be a little bit easier to sort of map things like a hat and the snare and everything else. So let's see. The first hit's off rhythm. All right. I decided to go for straight off beats and a stagger in the middle. We could add a light hat hit on the quarter notes, the same as the bass drum kicks. I think if we went rapid 8th notes, it's going to start to sound jazzy, which is not necessarily what we're going for here. Very subtle. You can only slightly hear the hat in the background. I don't think we need to add any tom hits. Nah, I think that might get a little bit too distracting. Okay, let's stop this. We'll save our progress so far since I don't want to lose my work here. We'll save that, and now we need to think of a complementary or bass line. I usually go rhythm, bass, melodies whenever I do these theme constructions. It's just sort of a habit. But I kind of think we need to go orchestral with strings for this. And now that we're putting the rhythm together, I really need to avoid falling into Searching for Friends from FF6, which is one of my favorite overworld themes, because it's such a good melody, but I don't want to just ape a really well-known theme. In fact, it's been one of my major concerns in working on this particular project is that subconsciously themes that I know from the past that I really like are kind of creeping into the things I'm writing, and I don't want that. When I do my final pass of which themes I'm going to keep for the release, that's going to be my major thing is if I release this, are people going to say, oh, well, he just ripped off that one well-known theme and kind of just plugged it in his... I don't want to do that. That's just going to cause problems. So let's load up string presets and see what we got. We could, with this particular beat, we'll keep the beat in the background. I'll drop the volume down a little bit so I can talk over it easily. But the idea of, I don't know if I want to do a slower, prolonged progression versus something that's going to be a little more short and moving. In fact, I might need to raise the volume on this for the strings. What I ultimately foresee in this particular theme is going to be a mix of string and woodwind, maybe flute type instruments for an overworld theme. We're talking about the bass line and the low end part of the overall song. We start there first. Let's see if we can figure out a good note progression for the low end. See, if we just did a simple ascending melody, it's going to be very similar to almost everything I've done, which is very elementary and probably too simple and repetitive, but something like... we could try and arpeggiate it. Too high. If we did something like that, it suddenly sounds like a villain theme, just by changing the half steps a little bit. And like doing something like kind of like a chromatic where we're going up or down in half steps, it definitely makes it sound more kind of villain-esque, which has been interesting learning about because I don't have a background in music theory or composition at all. I am very much not a trained musician, so when I do this stuff, I'm just messing around and trying to do it by ear. Maybe go a little bit higher. Yeah, that sounds a little bit less like a villain theme. Messing with some chord progression could be an interesting way to do that. This isn't really the bass line. We're not doing the melody. So we'll put this on track 3, and we can come back to the bass line. That's a possibility. I haven't really done a whole lot of that type of progression in these themes that I've been working on. Start here, maybe. And then it repeats. Sorry, I hit the mic. It's a little bit tricky here because I have to talk into the mic to explain what I'm doing, but I also have to be able to hit the keys on the synthesizer and then hit the start and stop on the loop all at the same time without screwing it up. So let me try and record this and then we'll talk about it. Okay, now we're looping it. without starting over. So this is kind of a more prolonged potential melody. Hey, Edward's here. What's up, Edward? Welcome to the jam stream. We are using the synth and the loop to brainstorm some ideas for next year's upcoming big BGM release. And the type of theme that I'm working on now is an overworld theme, like an RPG overworld theme. Let me know if you can't hear the loop playing back. It should be audible, and hopefully I'm not competing with it too much. I can drop the volume down if that's the case. Okay, that's pretty functional. I don't know if we're going to keep that, but let's leave it for now for a potential first melody, and now come up with a bass line to complement this sort of string part. I think I want to do that with a different string preset, and then maybe go and add an electric bass under it to give it more of a low end. So let's try one of the other string presets. This is chamber strings. That sort of chord progression might sound good if we just move it around so that it's not out of tune, but not this particular string preset. I don't really like the way it sounds. It sounds a bit too mechanical. This is synth strings, which you'd think would sound more mechanical. It actually doesn't. All right, let's turn this back on. Try and find a good harmonizing part to put the low and bass line of the melody. It's probably a little bit hard to hear because most likely the string part is way louder. There we go. Drop it down. Okay. I think I'm going to use this chord progression. We'll put it on track 2, and then what I want to do is do this chord with this string preset, and then we're going to add a heavier bass underneath it. Cut that off too soon. Yep, it is definitely off tempo. Or we don't even have to do quarter notes, we can just do sustain. That might actually be easier to sync up. And then what we can do is go in and add a low end. This is just 2 notes. And that might be easier to give it kind of more of a low end resonance. we need to get the repeat on point this time. Now we just need to make sure it syncs up. Okay, I think we're good there. Now we need to find a good low end instrument to pair. Same note progression. This is just C and E. I'm really bad at music notation because I forgot how to read sheet music. This is contrabass. That might be a little bit too heavy on the low end. Yep. Okay, here's a fretless electric bass. Probably a little bit subtle, but you're going to get a lot more of a kind of low end resonance underneath the string melody there. I think it sounds better. So we've got 3 tracks. Let me save this. I don't want to lose my work again. So we got 3 tracks so far. I think so far it's got some got potential. Edward says the drum loop could use some variation, I think. That's the thing I was wrestling with, I think probably before you jumped on. The original, let me drop this out here. The original drum rhythm had a double kick in there, but trying to sync up the snare and hat hits was getting to be kind of annoying. So I dropped it and went for straight quarter notes on the bass kicks. And as a result, we have a much more simple rhythm. So it's basically 2 measures, 8 beats, and then the other instruments in between. So I can't change the duration. It's going to be 2 measures no matter what. But we can still add things in between for those 2 measures. So before we move on to the higher end melody, we could think about some other things to potentially add. Again, this is meant to be an overall theme, so it's not going to be really kind of aggressive and dynamic. It's meant to be more of something you're hearing as you're walking around on an overworld map. But as far as the rhythm goes, well, what do you think, Edward? What do you think would be a good complementary percussion sound to add in? We could add a different type of hat. We can add maybe... Oh, here's something we could do. I don't think I've showed this off yet. Let me figure out where it is on the preset. There it is. This is something I've experimented with on some other tracks you folks haven't heard yet, but timpani. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily going to fit for something like this, because it's going to give it a lot more kind of like a bombastic, heavy, almost in march type sound. But actually, timpani works pretty well for complementing low end melodies and harmonies, which is interesting. That's what I've used it for. I've had a couple of some more ambient songs that just have some timpani hits in the background to kind of sound like almost like a thunder rumble. So I don't know that it's necessarily going to fit for a theme like this, but if we wanted to, we could do something like if we wanted to make this a lot more of an aggressive type sound, we could do something like. And now, instead of sounding like an overworld theme with just the rhythm, now it sounds like something's chasing you. Not really the effect we're going for, but for emphasis and adding some kind of more heavier. Timpani's good for that. Edward asked, do you have triangle? Yes. Now I gotta figure out which sound set has it, but there's definitely triangle on here. Let's look at standard kit. Here's one. Do you think triangle on the hat hits, they're very subtle, like they're in the more background, but on the snare and hat hits, you think the triangle would be better sounding if it was on the hit or offbeat? So that's on beat. Or do we want it like one hit in the middle? Or do we want double hits? Problem is the rhythm isn't symmetrical. Each measure is actually each measure is different. I can up the volume on this so you can hear the triangle a little bit more. I'm trying to figure out where to place it. I don't think eighth notes is the way to go. It's going to be a little bit too prominent in the front part of the rhythm. What I can do is, okay, Edward says try it on the offbeats. That's what it sounds like on the offbeats. I'll record it on another layer. That way I don't screw up the original rhythm. And if we like it, I'll just overdub it onto the main track. So it sounds like. Even though I didn't get the full thing, you can hear it when it repeats. Okay, Edward says just the first 3 hits in the first measure. Okay, so it's going to be only on the first measure, and then the second measure will have no triangle hits. So let's see. That would sound like. Oh, first 3 hits in each measure. Okay, I gotcha. Hey, Sourlet's here. What's up, Saralad? Good to see you, man. We are trying to compose an RPG overworld theme. Okay. Let me redo that. That's what it'd sound like with 3 on the first of each measure. So let's see if we can get that to record. That's not bad. It definitely fills in the rhythm a little bit more. It doesn't have quite so many gaps. Starlat says, a little tired, but fine. And you guys? Oh, I'm good. It's been an interesting and educational stream so far. If you want to hear me talk about a lot of the mechanical aspects of beatboxing, that was the first half of the stream. I demoed this new idea of mine called the sound inventory. We'll definitely be revisiting that in the future. Oh. Okay, there it is. Alright, so how do we feel about having the triangle hits on the first 3 offbeats of each measure? I think it sounds good. If we were to add that, it would be very subtle. Under it says maybe a different instrument. I don't know what this is. Every synthesizer percussion preset ever created has this sound. I don't know what it's called, but it's really funny to me. Definitely not appropriate for what we're doing here, but it is a funny sound. What about a tambourine? What if we did tambourine, but instead of the first 3 hits, we just make it every offbeat, and we just drop the volume down so it's not, you know, overpowering the entire rhythm. I think that might actually work. Get rid of this. I think that might actually work a little bit better, and it won't necessarily be too distracting. So I'm going to overdub this here. We'll see how it sounds. That's not bad. I'm gonna leave that for now. Once I move on, I'm not gonna be able to undo it. But I think I like the way that it builds out the rhythm a little bit. It gives it kind of a more, gives it a little more upbeat kind of sound. But if we add in the other 2 layers, let's start it from the beginning. What I foresee in the final mix is having the rhythm be a little bit lower in the mix compared to everything else, so that you're not hearing just percussion. You really want the melody and the bass line harmony to be a bit more forefront for an overworld theme. So if I was going to change the mix, I have them all kind of equal now, just so that they're not super loud on the stream. But if I up the bass line and the string harmony or melody, then you're hearing them more forefront compared to the rhythm. That's probably the way I would arrange the final mix. But all right, let's save that. Actually, before I lose the ability to undo, I'm gonna do the tambourine, but I'm gonna drop the overall volume a little bit because it's what you're hearing first and foremost in the rhythm, and while I do like it, I don't want it to be the main thing you hear. So let me just undo that. Okay. I'm gonna re-overdub it, but I'm gonna drop the volume down about 25%. A little bit too soft. Up it a bit. I think it's better. It might not sound dramatically different to folks listening on stream, but it blends in a bit more rather than have the tambourine being just in your face and being the main part of the rhythm you hear. Okay, so let's move on from, actually now I'm going to save it. Let's move on from the rhythm, bass line, and string melody, and now let's look for a high-end melody to complement. And this is where we're going to go for woodwinds. Let's look at the flutes. This is sweet flute. This one's not bad. Ooh, sweet pan gives it a lot more of kind of a wood echoey sound. If you were doing a forest, like a kind of more whimsical forest theme, that could work. We could also plug something like this into an overworld theme too. Again, you're walking around through fields and roads and nature. So this gives it kind of more of a nature type sound. Let's play around with this one and see how it slots into everything here. Maybe a little bit too high. So what I'm experimenting with here, hopefully it's audible. I was messing around with a similar chord progression to the string melody. It doesn't need to be a chord. It could be a single note with one flute. doesn't sound bad. You go up and then come back down. Ooh, I actually like that. And then we hold the note until it repeats. That works. We can octave it too. If we jumped up, that's 2 octaves actually. You do 3 octaves. You want to get really wild and wacky with it and have 3 octaves on the flute, but maybe back off the 2 higher ones so they're not overpowering the low one. Let's try it. I'm gonna put it on a separate layer for now. Sorry, hit the mic again. Okay, that's got some potential. But I'm gonna put them on a separate track. And we'll compare it. Okay. Interesting. That actually kind of comes together better than I would have expected on the first pass. Problem is, and I'm just listening to this could be an overworld theme. This could also be like a romantic ballad theme too. Because it's actually kind of moody and sad. Actually, I really like that melody. It's so simple, and again, it's not musically complex by any means. It's just a note and like 3 steps up and then down. It is maybe one level of complexity higher than just going up, single steps on the scale, whole notes, no halves. But it meshes really well for some reason. One thing we could do to potentially change the vibe of theme, if we wanted to try and make it a bit more up-tempo and change the BPM, that could make it seem more like an overall theme than like a more ballad theme. We could try it. I already saved it, so it's fine. Let's see. This is at 91.8, so 92 beats per minute. What if we put it up to 120? It's going to be a lot faster. Problem is, messing with the beats per minute on the overall loop track sometimes gets a little wonky with the loops themselves, because it's basically forcing the recorded loop to speed up, and so it doesn't cleanly do it. That's why you're hearing a bit of weirdness on, I think it's the bass. Yeah. It's basically repeating the bass. I think it's forcing the bass to repeat faster at a higher tempo, so you're getting kind of like a. Funny thing is, I don't actually dislike the way that sounds at a faster tempo, if there wasn't the issue of the bass kind of clipping a little bit, because I think the rest of it sounds fine. You get that same sort of clipping on the strings. It's because they're sustained notes and the loop is speeding everything up. It's speeding the loop itself up to the BPM. And so that's why you're getting that choppiness. But if we didn't have that and it was clean, that would actually sound more like an overworld theme than the original one we did, which is really funny to me, because it's a simple change of tempo and it dramatically changes the feel of the song, at least to my ears. It sounds more like a, hey, we're walking through a map, maybe something bad happened, so it's like the second overworld theme, but it's a bit more overworld themey than the original, and I don't know how I feel about that. Let's revert it. I'm not going to keep that because I like the slow tempo of the original, but it's interesting how just changing the beats per minute by like 10 or 20 technically, how it changes the feel and makes it in line with what we're originally intending to do. So that's interesting. So let's turn the original back on. What if we upped it by just a little, like half what we did? Still get the clipping. Yeah, I think if we wanted to truly redo it at a higher speed and make it clean, we'd have to re-record it or change it in post, which I've never done for my themes, but I will file that away as a possibility because that's not hard. Well, the software I use to record these is nothing really that complicated. It's an audio, music mixing and recording software. I just suck at using it. But I could take the whole loop and basically shrink it down and speed its tempo up. And I think it would avoid the whole weird clipping issue because it'd just be taking the whole audio track and speeding it up. It wouldn't be speeding up each looped section of it, but we'll see. I want to use this theme for something. I just don't know what yet. But it's kind of a pretty song. Thinking about how I would actually structure it for recording purposes. Maybe we would go something like, we start with the beat and the low end, and then bring in the higher strings after that. same time. Edward asks, can you make the sounds fade in? Yes, that's one thing I've been messing around with on the more recent ones I've been doing. So all I have to do is change the faders and have the whichever parts, if we want to have them start low and have the sound and volume go up, then as I'm recording it, when I turn the loop on like this, I can just gradually increase the fader volume and have them fade in so they're not just popping in. I have that problem on a couple tracks I need to go back and fix. And rather than have the loop abruptly start, then that's how I fix it. I basically have the loop start, but I ease the fader from low to high to have the sound come in. So that's definitely something that we can do. Might be good to do that with the flutes because they come in a bit higher than everything else. So if we bring in the flutes, we just, here, I'll demonstrate. Come in real soft, and by the time it starts building to the high note, they're at full volume for the mix. And then on the repeat, they can stay at the same volume, I think. It'll get a little bit tricky if I'm redoing the fade every time, because then I have to be really exact to make sure I'm fading them in by the exact same amount. But that's something I can definitely do in post. I won't think about that. Edward says, I think that would work with the strings. Yeah, that's also a possibility. Like the high strings. We have the high strings start low and fade in. We could do it with the strings and the flutes too separately because they're not coming in at the same time. The higher strings are coming in first and then we get the flute part last. That's definitely a possibility. I kind of like the potential for that. Very good. I will definitely file that one away. I think that's a successful theme. I'm kind of surprised how that high melody sort of came together. It's so simple, but to my ear, it sounds pretty good. So we'll leave that one for now. There's still other things I can do before I actually record the final versions, but that's a great start. Looking at the time, we're just shy of 2 hours. Before we jump off for the day, for folks that are hanging out, I'd like to preview a couple of the tracks from this upcoming theme pack. Just to give you folks a feel for the stuff that I've been working on and what some of these songs are going to sound like. Let's see. The problem is I had to save these in different blank spots throughout my loops. I don't remember where they all are. Okay, here's one. Well, maybe we'll do 2 or maybe 3, just so you folks can hear them. This one is recorded at a louder volume, though, so I need to be a little bit careful. That should be fine. So, this one, I'm going to try and real quickly recreate how I recorded it. And it's going to might not be exactly the same. But this is kind of a rough cut preview of the song. This one's called Scarlet Sands. See if you can pinpoint what part of a video game you'd be hearing this particular theme. It's probably blatantly obvious, but here's what it sounds like. says desert theme. Yep, you got it. Originally, this started off as like a kind of more tribal jungle, like heavy jungle type theme. But once I started messing around with the bass and the additional instruments, like it's kind of like it's a synthesizer or filtered strings is more accurate. Then I immediately sort of conjured up images of, you know, like your typical desert theme. If the name didn't give it away, I mean, hopefully it does convey that sort of vibe. I actually like this one. This one's kind of fun. This one's different from a lot of the other ones I've recorded. All right, so that was Scarlet Sands. Here's another one. Let's see, which one is this? Okay. I'm not going to tell you the name of this one. We'll see if the sort of themes kind of convey what I was going for with this one. And this one, I have no idea where the volume levels are, so we'll have to... Let's see. Okay. All right. From the top. This one might be a little bit loud. Transition a little bit. Stealth mission. That's a good guess. This one's kind of an anomaly for the pack. So it's a little bit of a trick question, but this song is called Rock Dragon, and it's meant to be sort of a unique encounter with like a giant rock dragon. It's a bit of a pun because it's one of the more rocker sounding themes. So there wasn't really a good way for you to guess the context. But I haven't decided if I want this one to behave more like a regular theme or a battle theme, because it's a little slow for a battle theme, but it's fun. This one's also kind of simple, but it sounds like something you'd hear in an old PlayStation 1 RPG, like a Capcom RPG. I do need to come up with like a good stealth mission type of song. That's another one. I have one that's kind of like Thief inspired ish, but not one that's like a sneaking theme. That's something I should think about. Good idea, Edward. Let's see if we can do one more. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Edward says more like a build up to a battle theme. Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I was going for here. Like, you encounter this character, like a big stone dragon of sorts, and this is kind of its entrance theme, and you're talking to it, and you're getting ready for like a decision path that's going to lead you to either dialogue or a battle. And so that theme is what you're hearing as you're talking to it, and then depending on your choice, then it goes in the actual theme for battle. All right, let me see which other one should I show off. Again, I don't remember the order I saved these. There's some of the Halloween songs are saved. It's all mixed up in here, so I gotta figure out where I put what. Oh, I know a good one. I gotta figure out where the heck I put it. I think it's in the 30s. You'd think I would label all of my loop tracks, but the reality is when I run out of space, I just copy them all off and then start recording in blank spots. So as long as I remember which track is which, it doesn't matter, because I'd have to reset the file title every single time. Edward says robot voice. Yeah, sorry if some of these tracks have a filter on them by default. So give me 1 second to find the one I want to demo, and then you should be able to hear me fine. For the record, I did write a waltz song. This has been my white whale since I've started doing BGM songs. I don't know if I like it enough to include it in the pack. We'll see. That's not the one I'm looking for, though. There it is, finally. All right. This one, a bit of a different vibe than the last one. Let's see if you can guess where this theme would be found in a game. Edward says factory theme. You're close. In fact, that's a really good guess. This is a blacksmith theme. This one's called Industrious Smiths. And this one is meant for encountering like an NPC or characters that are like in a forge, either Forge Town or like visiting a forge to get weaponry made. I wanted to try a blacksmith inspired theme, so that's how we got this one. I'll tell you what, coming up with the rhythm was probably the most work for this entire one. The rest of the parts are pretty simple. They're just simple melodies and bass lines. But I used a combination of the synthesizer's percussion set and then the loop station's filter effects to create this. And it took a lot of work, but I knew I wanted to go for a real specific type of sound that sounded like, a hammer working on something. So factory theme is actually pretty close in the relevant scope of what I did here. But it was a lot of work, but I think it really paid off for creating that sort of vibe. Because even if you just heard this by itself, I think most people would think, yeah, it sounds like someone working in a factory or like smacking an anvil. This is kind of a fun one. And then the rest of the stuff is, again, pretty simple, but I think it conveys the whole theme of someone working in a forge, whacking away at weapons or armor. Edward says, good job, Ahab, or are you Ishmael? Well, as far as the white whale goes, that's the waltz. That's not this. I don't even think that's 3/4. I think this is just a really slow 4/4. But my white whale is creating a good 3/4 waltz song. There is one I have here. I won't bother showing it off. I think it's okay. It's simple. It gets the job done, but like I have struggled at least 3 times in total, maybe 2 times on stream to create a good BGM track for a waltz, and I will do it eventually. Now that I have the synth, it's going to be a bit easier, but yeah, I want it to be good, so we'll see if that one ends up making the final cut for tracks for the pack release. You'd think it wouldn't be hard, but like it's not the tempo. It's coming up with all of the instrumental tracks around the tempo because, like, well, I won't bother doing it, but simple tempo for a 3/4 waltz is just 1 2 3 1 2 3. Doing a percussion line from that's not hard. In fact, that's the easy part. It's coming up with the melodies, bass lines, and everything else around that, and not having it sound really off kilter and weird. That's the hard part, and that's what I struggle with when doing waltz type stuff. Maybe I should go and study some classical music that's done it and see what kind of techniques they employ, because I went strings and maybe a flute for the one I tried writing, and it's okay. Again, it's not the best, but it's better than all the stuff I've done up till now, so I don't know. Maybe if I can try and do 2 or 3 more and then compare the versions and pick the best one, there'll be one that goes in the final pack, but that's easily given me the most trouble. It's waltzes. I don't know why. I'm sure if I tried doing a 5/4 song, it'd be even harder, but for some reason, creating the instrument complements for a waltz is giving me trouble. So we'll see. All right. Well, I think that will do it. Let me see if there's any other ones nearby this one on the loop that I could show off. Edward says, I think a song in Y's 8 or E's A's in 3/4. I do not know the E's series. I know it's been around forever, but that's one I've never played. There's got to be one from an old RPG I'm not readily thinking of that's in a waltz form, waltz tempo in 3/4. I don't know. I gotta look. Send me the link to the track on Discord, Edward. If someone's uploaded on YouTube, send it to me and I'll listen to it, because I need all the reference material I can get, I think. All right. Let me see if there's one more. All right. We haven't listened to a battle theme yet. This one is interesting. You know it's a battle theme. Before we end the stream for today, your guess will be what kind of battle this theme is going for. So we have like boss battles. We have battles against rivals in all sorts of different settings. This one was sort of designed to be around a certain type of setting. So let's see if it's obvious in the actual mix. Let's take a listen. Edward says, a battle on a train. Oh, okay. I see your message in Discord. Thanks, Edward. I'll look at that later. Appreciate it. All right, so battle on a train. That's actually a pretty good guess too. In fact, thinking of a purely fantasy setting, there wouldn't be something like trains. We're going for like medieval fantasy-ish. This is a battle theme on, or specifically a boss battle theme on a ship. So like a boat. This one's called, I think it's called War of Waves. This is meant to be like the party is traveling across the seas and they get attacked by like some sort of major antagonistic force and they gotta fight on the boat. And so I was going for kind of like a, similar to like maybe a pirate metal-ish type beat, and then the rest of the instruments kind of complement that. The problem, and something I've been wrestling with a little bit, I like this theme a lot. I think it sounds fun. It definitely sounds like a good boss theme. The problem is the high melody. So the horn and the flute. This portion of the melody, which is the main part of the high melody, it's what you hear primarily because the horns are forefront. This section of the melody sounds very similar to a snippet from Chrono Trigger's Magus' boss theme mix. And that's a really famous song, and I didn't realize it until after I recorded all of the bits and I was listening to it, like, that does sound very similar to a couple parts, because there's even a flute part in Magus' theme, but it's at the beginning before the beat comes in. And so I want to use this one, but I gotta think a little bit about whether or not this is gonna get me into trouble, because it's not the same rhythm. I don't think it's the same notes. It might be an octave lower, but it's very similar. The rest of it, it's a different tempo, it's a different style and different speed than Magus' theme. His is a bit more slower and chuggy, but that part is the forefront, and I don't want people claiming I just ripped off something from a really, really well-known theme. But I gotta figure that out. It's not like I'm selling these for profit or anything, but I'd be curious to see if YouTube's automatic flagging would ping off of that, because again, it's not the same, but it's very similar. Edward said, sounds like you're about to fight some bulls. Bullfighting theme? That's probably because the horns could kind of sound like maybe a more like Spanish or Hispanic type of melody. But I think with the strings, it sort of pulls it into kind of more of a, not medieval, but it pulls it into more of a fantasy type of theme. But yeah, I got to do some thinking on that one. It's one of my favorites of the battle themes I've made so far, but we'll see. I don't want to get in trouble. But writing the rhythm for this one was pretty fun. There's a lot of noodling around with overdubs on the percussion preset in the synth. What you'll find on this pack in general is that there's not going to be a lot of beatbox sounds. There's a couple tracks that are kind of hybrids that I don't know if I'm going to keep, but it's most likely going to be primarily synthesizer based instruments, because I think it fits a little better and they're a little bit more clean sounding, but we'll see. The loop factors in pretty heavily into providing effects. So again, I'm really excited about the project, and it's been a lot of fun working on it. So we will see how it pans out. So with that, I think we are good to call that a jam stream for today. Again, I'm pleased with the progress we made on that one overworld theme. I will figure out if I want to make any tweaks to that before we get to the final released version, but definitely productive. It's kind of hard doing these live in front of a chat because I have to explain what I'm doing, and I'm used to just working on these on my own, but it's good practice. Well, hopefully you folks found that process interesting. We'll be doing more of this in the next jam stream. But let's see who's online to raid from the homie list. Oh, let's see. Oh, I see Edward's hitting me with a last minute hydrate. Thank you for that. I see Yatra's online. We can go raid her. What's she doing? Oh, Gardic phone. Okay. Well, we'll go say what's up to Yatra. So let me go ahead and stop this. We will go ahead and go to outro. And we'll call that good for today. So thanks for coming by and hanging out. I will be figuring out the schedule for next week. It'll go up tomorrow on Twitter as usual. I gotta figure out what spooky